Story 1. Australia's most disturbing case. Let me tell you this story the way it should be told. Because if you only look at the headline, you miss the most disturbing part. Katherine Knight didn't look like a monster. She lived in a small Australian town. She had a job. She had relationships. On the surface, she looked normal. But people who got close to her noticed something early on. Katherine didn't just love, she possessed. Every relationship followed the same pattern. Intense attachment, control disguised as care, and then sudden, explosive anger, followed by calm. That calm is important, because calm is what made people stay. When Katherine met John Price, things escalated fast. Arguments, police visits, friends warning him to leave. And at one point, he did. But he came back. Not because things were better, but because he believed he could handle it. The last night of John's life wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no obvious warning signs. He went to sleep in his own home. And that was it. What happened next wasn't rushed. It wasn't chaotic. Investigators later realized something chilling. Katherine had time, and she used it. When police entered the house the next day, they didn't immediately react. Not because of violence, but because of how deliberate everything felt. Like someone had followed a plan to the end. During questioning, Katherine didn't deny what she'd done. She didn't panic. She simply said she didn't want John to ever leave her again. Psychologists later described her as one of the most dangerous personality profiles they had ever studied. Not because she lost control, but because she never did. And that's the part that stays with you. Because monsters you can see are easy to avoid. But Katherine Knight lived among people for years, quietly crossing a line most humans never even approach. And by the time anyone realized how far she'd gone, it was already irreversible. Story 2. This killing left America horrified. Let me tell you a story that made a lot of people deeply uncomfortable, not because of what happened, but because of how hard it was to decide what it meant. Omaima Nelson was a young woman living in California. She had immigrated to the United States and eventually married William Nelson, a man decades older than her. From the outside, their life looked stable. A house, financial security, no obvious red flags to neighbors. But when police were called to their home one night, William Nelson was dead. Omaima didn't run. She didn't hide. When officers asked what happened, she told them something that, at first, sounded painfully familiar. She said it was self-defense. According to Omaima, William had been controlling and abusive for a long time. That night, she said, things escalated. She believed her life was in danger, and she reacted. In the early hours of the investigation, many people believed her. The story fit a pattern society had seen before. A younger woman, trapped in a relationship with an older, more powerful man. But as detectives started digging deeper, the case took a turn not because of the violence itself, but because of what happened after. Omaima didn't immediately leave the house. She didn't call for help right away. Instead, she stayed. And when detectives interviewed her, they noticed something unsettling. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't disoriented. She was calm, almost methodical. She spoke about the events of that night as if she were explaining a series of decisions, not a moment of panic. Psychologists later pointed out a detail that changed how many people viewed the case. Omaima didn't describe overwhelming fear. She described control. She said that, for the first time in her life, she felt like she was the one deciding what happened next. As investigators uncovered more details about her actions following William's death, public opinion began to fracture. Some people held on to the idea that she was a victim who had been pushed too far. Others started asking a different question. If this was purely about survival, why didn't it stop when the threat was gone? The trial became less about proving whether Omaima had caused William's death, that much was clear, and more about understanding her state of mind. Was this a desperate act by someone cornered? Or was it something that crossed into a place most people never reach? Throughout the proceedings, Omaima showed very little emotion. She didn't cry in front of the jury. She didn't beg for sympathy. When asked about her choices, she simply said she did what she had to do. That answer unsettled people more than any graphic detail ever could, because it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like certainty. The jury ultimately convicted Omaima Nelson. But when the verdict was read, there was no feeling of relief in the courtroom. No sense that everything had been neatly resolved, because the case left behind a question that still doesn't have a comfortable answer. At what point does self-preservation end and something darker begin? The most disturbing part of this story isn't the crime itself. It's the fact that reasonable people can hear the same facts and walk away with completely different conclusions. And once that line becomes blurred, it's hard to know where it ever truly existed. Story 3. The killer who made the FBI listen in fear. If you imagine the most dangerous people as reckless or out of control, this story might unsettle you. Because Ed Kemper was neither. He was calm, soft-spoken, and extremely intelligent. Ed Kemper stood nearly 7 feet tall, but his presence wasn't aggressive. When he spoke, he was polite, articulate, and attentive. People often described him as easy to talk to. That's what made him dangerous. From a young age, something was off. Ed was highly intelligent, but emotionally isolated. His relationship with his mother was deeply toxic, filled with constant criticism, humiliation, and control. She told him he was worthless, that he would never amount to anything. Over time, those words didn't just hurt him. They became part of how he understood himself. As a teenager, Ed crossed a line that shocked everyone. He was institutionalized, labeled dangerous, and closely studied by psychologists. But Ed had a skill few people noticed at first. He knew exactly how to present himself. He understood what doctors wanted to hear. He learned the language of remorse, insight, and self-awareness. Eventually, experts decided he was rehabilitated. They were wrong. Back in society, Ed didn't stand out. He blended in. He observed. He listened. He even became friendly with local police officers, spending hours talking with them, learning how they thought, how investigations worked, and where mistakes were usually made. No one suspected him, because Ed didn't behave like a criminal. He behaved like someone who understood the system better than most. When he was finally arrested, there was no dramatic chase. Ed turned himself in. What followed shocked investigators even more than the crimes themselves. Ed didn't deny anything. He didn't deflect blame. Instead, he explained. He analyzed his own behavior in chilling detail, calmly describing motives, patterns, and warning signs. At one point, an FBI agent later admitted that interviewing Ed didn't feel like an interrogation. It felt like a lecture. Ed spoke as if he were a case study and the subject. What disturbed psychologists the most was this. Ed didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as a logical outcome. In his mind, every action had a reason. Every step followed naturally from the one before it. And that raises an unsettling question. If someone can explain something so horrific with such clarity, where does responsibility truly begin? Ed Kemper remains incarcerated today. He reads extensively, participates in interviews, and speaks with calm intelligence. If you heard him talk without knowing who he was, you might find him reasonable, even likable. And that's the most unsettling part of this story. Because the scariest people aren't always the ones who look dangerous. Sometimes, they're the ones who make perfect sense. We just heard 3 very different stories. 3 people, 3 paths that all cross the same line. One acted out of possession. One claimed it was survival. And one believed everything could be explained with logic. So here's the question I want to ask you. What do you think is more disturbing? Someone who loses control? Or someone who is completely calm when they cross that line? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to read them. And if stories like this make you pause and think, hit like so I know, and subscribe. Not for entertainment, but so we can keep talking about the darker corners of human behavior.